you so much, Khyati. Thank you and welcome our esteemed panelists for this discussion. I hope everybody, I can't see, I think everybody is here. Okay, all right, yes. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start my first question straight away, and I want to go to Mr. Menon to start with. So tell me, we have seen the conversation since morning, and there's so many learnings that are out there. But I want to start by asking that what are some of the operational challenges that CLOs or CHROs face, and how to effectively tackle them, especially given the last 11 months context?
Okay, thank you, Ruhail. Good afternoon to everybody, including the esteemed panel members. Now, it's a very, very valid question, and this question actually, not just now, but you could hear this question probably even a decade back. And one of the basic issues that any CHRO or a CLO today faces would be the fact that the organization would be asking that what is return on investments on your learning and training programs. Now, it's a very, very valid question to ask. Right. But the answer is not so simpler or so easier. Firstly, one needs to really think about the fact that what is the time frame that one is looking at. Any training, any learning program, of course, it doesn't give you quick wins. It takes time to give you return on investments. And and as an organization, as a learning culture, one needs to accept the fact that the so-called ROI would come to you at maybe at a later stage. So that's one of the challenges, to define what is the ROI. The second challenge, what I feel, is the fact that there is a differentiation between a training program and a capability development program, isn't it? A training program is required for everybody to do their current job well, and a capability development program, according to me, would be building up the individual to kind of do their job in a dynamic environment which is unforeseen today. Mm-hmm. So the question is that how do you balance this out? Especially because of the fact that one has seen, let's assume we are moving towards a post-COVID world. Mm-hmm. And the business dynamics have completely changed in last about 9 or 10 months. Everybody before COVID always used to anticipate that the new age business would be very, very different. But as we speak, we are seeing it, right now, currently. The very fact that you and me are in a virtual medium discussing is a very, very different model that we are talking about. Possibly a year back, we would not have anticipated something like this happening on a regular basis. And so when I talk about capability development, if I am kind of building my team, my employees to take on future, the future is changing at a much faster pace. So how do you align these both, saying that the programs that I deliver and this speed of change that is happening around you, is there an alignment there? So that would be my second issue. One of the third issue that I see is that how do you build resilience in people and processes? Every time there is again a discussion that is happening saying that the processes that has got established possibly will not hold good in the future. It needs a constant change. Change is inevitable. It is constant. And then how do you build up people? So these are some of the challenges. Now the other question, Ruhail, of yours is saying that, okay, if these are the challenges, how do you kind of make sure that you overcome these, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and that is something which, every one of us constantly keep thinking about it, right? One of the aspect is that, what I feel is that learning cannot be an event. It has to be happening on a daily basis. It has to get integrated as a part of the culture. Gone are those days of employees actually working for 9 to 5. The requirement of the business is such that you end up having longer hours. So the idea is that, okay, if you were to provide some kind of a learning journey or an architecture to an individual, can it be, at his time, at his pace, as per his requirement? So that's why the concepts of bit-sized learning, the concepts of, mobile learning through an app-based application, the concepts of what is required is what is going to be offered, etc. are some of the things which we feel will cater and address to some of these needs. And I think the world over is actually moving towards it. We see a massive change in the way learning and capability development programs are being rolled out in India. I think, according to me, next about couple of years, I think we'll be pioneers in many of these. World will be doing a catching up job with us. And, so those would be some of the responses to your question from my side, Ruhail.
Very well elaborated. I think you have pinpointed the pain points, if I may call it. I want to come to you, Ms. Raghuvanshi, and ask you the same question. And what kind of understanding is there from your perspective as far as the operational challenges are concerned and the best ways to address them? So what is the Randstad view on that?
Thank you. And yes, I would agree to a lot of things Praveen said, before me as well. I think the biggest challenge, I would say for us is to how do you really create impact for business, right? That's a question that constantly you are haunted with, whether you like it or you don't. And that's always about, okay, if you have done an intervention, if you've done a program, how has it really impacted the lives of people, the organization, business outcome? I think that's now challenge number one. The second, again, coming to the way today learning and the platforms that have, like, as Praveen also mentioned, today we are in virtual mode and everything is happening, while people are sitting at their homes. So there is a kind of fatigue and exhaustion that comes in as well, with too much going their way and only in one format, which is virtual. So I think that's the second challenge us as function have, that how do you really keep your audience engaged despite the fact that it is going to be like this for quite some time. The third thing also I see is in terms of individual ownership in the entire learning journey, right? It's always said that how you can take a horse to the river, but you can't make the horse drink, right? So that's the same thing when you work towards creating a learning culture in the organization, moving towards a self-learning culture. You can give a lot of things to people, but are people really absorbing and using it the right way and applying it back to work the right way? So that's where I think us as fraternity have a lot of work to see how do you create those learning journeys, how do you link development to a career growth or a career stream architecture per se, so that people see value and find value in learning constantly. And also I think agility is a piece that Praveen just brought into the whole piece, that there is a lot that's changing constantly in situation like this. How do you, what behaviors, what competencies, skills do you train your people on, right? That is the biggest challenge. I think the entire world is focusing on how do you make your people more agile. And I think that's where also, us as a function, L&D as a function plays a huge role. And how do you make your workforce agile and much more open to challenges and changes as you come in? So these are, some of the challenges as a function, as HR, as L&D that you face. And not everywhere we have an answer, but I think what to me works the best is that whenever you get into an intervention, a program, always set the expectations in the beginning, and which means that people will always talk about ROI, but you will read 100 articles which says the ROI model doesn't really work. It's always about the expectation that the business leader is expecting, and as long as you can show evidence, I think you are there. We cannot really prove that yes, every penny that you put in actually kind of the way it came out. So I think it's about expectation setting. It's about also leadership talking about these things, really putting development as an agenda out there, because when the leader walks the talk, it's much easier, and the whole organization kind of rallies around that development is a very important agenda. I think these two things definitely help you in kind of coming over to the challenges, as we said, about really creating impact through your learning and development interventions. You are on mute, I think, Ruhail.
Sorry, yeah. So I mean, very valid points made. Setting the expectations, leaders walking the talk. I think those kind of things do address the challenges to a large extent. I want to come to you, Mr. Rudra. Such a large organization, and of course, bringing on board and bringing in that sentiment at that mass level. What are the big challenges that CHROs face primarily, according to you?
So, I think according to me, Ruhail, in the last 1 year has kind of tested all the limits of, I would say, all the functions, including HR,
Right.
and I think we have been sufficiently challenged to figure out that how can we assist the business and make the business survive and revive, in these times. So I
Right.
would say the HR overall has responded very positively and very, in very agile and an active manner. So examples of, I think things like, entire focus of HR moving in the first few months to, health wellness of the employees. Once that was kind of, established, then it started moving of how to make the employees still productive while they're, while they're working from home. Then from there it moved to, how to make their employees life more engaged, while they're still working from home, because the loneliness and the isolation was kind of taking a toll after a couple of months.
Right.
And then when things were kind of reviving and looking bright, I think then it was moving to how to help business to revive their productivity and gain back the lost business in whatever form. So it was more going back to a drawing board and going back to see, how to help the business in maybe in hiring some of the people, or maybe in reskilling or retooling some of this employees. Also, a lot of investment in IT has happened, especially in a company which is not a tech-centric organization, where not by default everybody was working from home. So a lot of that investment has happened through tools, technologies, buying of IT assets, um, and then the role of HR was to kind of not is to kind of enable, through some of that, through proper training, so that utilization of those assets could have gone up. So for example, we were always using Facebook at work, but in pandemic the Facebook at work use kind of increase almost like 1,000 times. Okay. So I think some of those products we had used, purchased a lot of some time back, I think showed a lot of relevance in this, in this today's time. So I would say this is the way I think if I can recall last 12 months, the HR has navigated, and more or less in today's time, if you ask me, I think it is definitely looking forward for in 21 and to kind of gain back the market share of the business, and to gain back also to gain back the employee confidence, in starting to work from home wherever they have not started, and wherever they have started, to keep focus of all the precautionary measures, but still be productive. So I would say it's a pretty much very complex game, and I would say the goalpost keeps on changing at every point of time, maybe almost on a monthly basis, sometimes more frequent. And I would say the HR organization in India especially has been able to do meet both that at the strategic level and also at an operational level. That is what my experience is.
Right. Great. We're joined by Professor Subramanian. I was waiting for him to join us. Thank you, sir, for being here with us. I want to direct this question to you as well. You've heard the panelists before you, and I want to also see this, add a little bit of context that last 12 months, 11 months have also added and been a learning for all of us. So overall operational challenges and how last year's bit added to it, I want to understand your views. How can those challenges, what are the bigger challenges and what are the remedies for those challenges?
Okay, thank you. Well, firstly, sorry, I think I've lost you there. Well, firstly, I thank you for the welcome. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for the slight delay in logging in. My apologies there. I think in some ways, I was just listening to my esteemed colleagues there, preceding me, a couple of people who talked there, Anjali and Mr. Suman. So I think they kind of touched upon some of the things. I think last year, in particular, because of COVID and so on, I think that's at least in the areas that I've seen. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, traditionally when we look at learning and development, we've been mostly looking at business performance, value, does it demonstrate value, productivity improvements, and so on. But I think in some ways, in the last year, there's been a much greater recognition of not necessarily just the performance issues, but also what you might call well-being issues, because of the issues around, as Suman was just saying, for instance, work from home. There's been many number of instances. I think there's been typically many organizations have reported higher levels of demotivation because being cut off from their colleagues and peers and that kind of thing. So I think certainly you see a lot more both conversation as well as articles and so on, people talking about things and how do we increase employee motivation, how do we increase their happiness if you like, because if you have a happy employee, you have a happy organization, and well-being overall. And I think some of that will probably be permanent. I think it's kind of increased the awareness in some ways that, okay, business performance, productivity is important. You also got to look at this other side. I think that's certainly one thing. The other thing I think, in some ways, I think, again, I heard Anjali talking about digital versus face-to-face. I mean, that debate was there, I guess, even before COVID. But I think that has kind of magnified that whole thing because people being at home. So there's a lot more of the digital that happened. So trying to draw the balance between how much of digital should one have, and at what point do we say? There is a lot of evidence in sort of again, you see some people talking about the probably surface of digital in some senses of the learning tools, if you like. So is there, has the pendulum moved too far towards that end? And so you can see that dialogue happening as in terms of just the effectiveness of some of the learning methodologies. Are we, to the extent possible, how do we draw the balance? Have we swung too far to that end? And we should bring back some of that face-to-face, because learning is not just the knowledge, as we all know. I mean, it's all that interaction and what you learn from each other. But the type of dialogue which is generated there when you're together, I guess I think that's the other thing that's probably come from the last year, what I would say.
Right. I think business leaders, HR, I think has been put to test. I mean, there was a time when people say this is the most it's the most convenient job and the best role to have, but I think they have been put to test. The CHROs and CLOs have been, they have been the front line for all the employees and given the emotional turbulence they had. I want to come to you, Mr. Menon. My second question to you. Tell me, what is the ideal way to develop an effective workflow and encourage a conducive learning culture in organizations, according to you?
Okay, if I were to give a response to it, there are many pointers to it. One of that could be that where does the learning ownership actually lie? Does it lie with the learner himself or herself? Does it lie with the manager? Does it lie with the HR function or the training team? Or does it lie with the leadership of the organization? And, and the answer should flow from the top. As Anjali mentioned, saying that, if leadership you have got a buy-in from the leadership, then it eventually gets cascaded down to every single employee in the company. And thereafter, you have a proper learning culture that gets created in the company. So that is required for an ideal workflow. That would be my point one. The second would be that the learning culture should be where there is no fear of failure. Everything else is infrastructure like programs, feedback mechanism. All of those things are required. But the very thought that the learning culture should propagate that, don't worry, even if you fail fast. Okay, so that is something which I think has to get cascaded down to people, so they will become more innovative. They are ready to take on challenges without the fear of failing. The third would be, the balance. One has to strike the balance between individual and organizational capability. Right? It is important that you have a vision of the organization. You should know where the organization is actually going to grow or go. and thereafter synergize individual capability to that. It has to talk to each other. Otherwise, the learning or training will become very, very siloed. The fourth is the fact that you have to identify performance gaps today. If you survive today, only then you can talk about future. There's no point in talking about future before you actually get your things right today. So this also, again, there needs to be a balancing act. And I also, as I mentioned previously, that learning cannot be just an event, right? It has to be a daily kind of affair. On a daily basis, the entire learning culture has to get created and cascaded down to everybody. And everybody should be able to experience and consume that. And otherwise, if it is just a one-off a program, people typically try and take a time off to attend the program with a view that, of course, there is nothing that needs to be done, just attend a program and come back. But the moment it becomes a part of the culture on a daily basis, then the upskillment that we are talking about will get entrenched into the system. And I think that will be beneficial for an employee as well as the organization. So these would be some of my responses.
Right. I want to go, before I go to Mr. Raghuvanshi, I want to go to Mr. Subramanian once again. Coming to you, what is your take on building this ideal workflow and conducive learning culture? Where does also that question which Mr. Menon pointed, that where does it start with? Does it start with the leadership? Does it start with the employee? How do you see this conversation?
I think I would kind of echo some of the things he mentioned. So, and I think again I heard Anjali mention it earlier as well. So ultimately, you do need a certain buy-in from the top. So if that isn't there, no matter what you do, it's going to be a hard sell. So, but that again becomes, I guess, part of the role of the. So we are not saying buy from the top, therefore it's the responsibility of the top. But it is very much the responsibility of the, I would say, the CLO or the CHRO to get that buy-in. But we're looking at two levels here. I mean, so that is that buy-in. But then equally, and that's where we could say, I think there's in some ways you could say it's really a buy-in at every level. But you need that sort of push at one level. But then I think, as Mr. Menon was saying, you do need the ownership at every level, but from the users. If you don't have that, it's not going to work out. So you need that as well. But then I guess part of the issue is that the challenge around how do you create that ownership? Now, some of that may come from the push from the top, but that by itself is not going to suffice. I think a big part of it will really come when those stakeholders feel that there is relevancy for them. So I think there you find responsibility comes squarely back onto the L&D team or CLO or the CHRO. So how do you create material which these stakeholders or these people, we're saying we want them to own it, but they are not going to own it unless they think, yeah, I really like this. This is very relevant to me. I think there again, so there is that responsibility. So it really kind of, therefore, in some ways you can see, ultimately, I mean, I think there's no question accountability would have to fall with the learning and development team or the CHLRO or the CLO, but it's a question of how do you make it happen. I guess that's what it comes down to. Right. The ownership question. So one part is, of course, the relevancy, which means you have to customize things. I think one of the things you often find, which I've personally experienced, you have something you go through, which is kind of for a number of people who engage in that particular learning, tool or particular learning process. It becomes sometimes a bit of the tick the box exercise. And that's when we know the ownership becomes a bit of a problem. So if it is customized, when you're trying to understand what exactly are the needs of the different groups of people and customize it to their needs, I think your chances of getting that ownership is higher. But then that's one part, is the content. But equally is the method of delivery. Right. And that is sort of, become quite important where we say, from passive to more active engagement, make it more fun, make it more interesting, make it more interactive. That again would ultimately result in greater ownership. So I think it's a combination of things that will eventually make it successful.
Right. Mr. Raghuvanshi, now we have a digital first attitude towards all learnings, since we're all working from home a lot. Tell me, how do you make it more immersive? What is your understanding of creating an ideal workflow, given that, we have so much of distraction around, we work from home, so many responsibilities to take care of, meet the targets at the same time. How do you, in this complexity, can make it more effective for your teams?
Thank you for that, and it was really nice listening to all the viewpoints that came in. I think one thing which is very, very clear to everybody today is that skilling is important, right? I think earlier there was a lot of focus and energy that used to go in just letting people know how important it is for you to constantly evolve and develop yourself. So with that becoming an easier option, and in fact there was a survey run sometime post-COVID lockdowns, and people actually rated career progression as their top 3 priorities, among the top 3 priorities, as they were looking at their career in a very new way. So it has been established that it's important. I think the challenge that lies at our end is in terms of how do you make that content visible? How do you ensure that content goes in a form that's easy for people to absorb and understand? And everybody is running this life which is like starting early in the morning till late in the night. People are these days working thanks to the work from home thing. So how do you in between ensure that the learning as an agenda is not derailed anywhere? And I think that's where it's important that you are using every channel possible today to reach out to your learners. And that's something I've experienced personally, that not one thing does not work for everyone, right? It's different strokes for different folks. So for some people, they quickly grab onto a learning management system and they go and pick courses on their own. And to some, you have to push, right? So that pull and push mechanism is something you have to constantly play around with. Engage with your audiences and see what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be changed. So while we talk about agility in the rest of the workforce, similarly, your learning and development teams have to be extremely agile to see what's working with the learners. And I completely agree that while as a function, the ownership may lie with L&D, with HR, but I also believe that to a large extent, it's important to communicate that self plays a very, very big role in this entire thing. But then our journey is how do you ensure that self is as engaged and as interested in everything that you are providing in the organization. So that's where I see where we need to work and where a lot of work is remaining for us.
Mr. Rudra, give me a sense of the L&D story in terms of how do you make your learnings, the internal learnings, the workflow, how do you make it more effective, engaging? How did you tide through the tough period that was there? Also, my additional question is, while there is access to the open net, people do learn on their own. So how can an organization bring in that added value to what they are looking for?
Okay, so on the first part, see, for us, since my company is largely into the infrastructure business, so our work happens not from home but from project sites. So definitely when our project sites were closed because of all the restrictions, so people had a lot of time at home, and I think we also I think took this advantage from an HR point to understand that at this point of time, if something we can keep the employees engaged, and that was learning. And when I say learning, it is learning in different forms, be it e-learning, be it app-based learning, or be it built learning, virtual instructor-led trainings. So I think our and also collaborating with other agencies. In fact, we started collaborating with even US business schools like Roche, Michigan, INSEAD, and Harvard, and you might be aware, all of them were offering courses and webinars free, okay, which never happened in past, okay. So, and since we had already collaboration with them in past, we used to do programs through them. So they offered many of these programs, which were obviously, some very good programs with international faculty and all being offered to us. We offered to our leaders, So I think that was a great learning opportunity. And I remember in the month of March, our training program spiked almost like 3 times, so almost like 1,000 to 1,500 people were doing courses in a month.
Right.
Okay. So that was the sudden spike which happened, and we obviously the spike tapered down in the coming times, but I think it exposed our employees a new total avenue of learning, and not just exposed but also got used to over a period of time that learning can happen, online learning can happen sitting at home, and you may still be able to do your work and still do learning. So I think that kind of realization that one doesn't have to always go into a classroom or a lab or a workshop, so I think that was the biggest realization. Secondly, I think we would say that learning became the biggest engagement during those times. So learning was not learning; it was the biggest engagement for an employee to keep, to keep their link with a group of employees, because learning always happens in groups. So you are interacting, you are discussing, you are talking to your colleagues. At least for the 2.5 hours, it was one of the biggest engagement of getting to know each other, getting to hear from the other. So I think that became one of the biggest engagement, and then till today, and I think going forward also, our digital learning or online learning is going to be a good proportion of our, of our learning offerings.
Right.
Coming to learning from other sources of around in the internet. So as I said, we have always collaborated with some of the best in the past, and we continue to do so. So for example, we have collaboration with Harvard. We do Harvard Mentors, mentor program. We have all their e-journals and newsletters and podcasts, subscribed. Then we also have our own mobile learning app. We have tied up with other companies like Cross Knowledge and all, who provide us content for e-learning. So I think what we do is that instead of opening the entire world to them, we curate some of these content and source and curate and provide it to the right audience who needs what. So for a management level of I would say employees, we provide them certain different content. For the rest of the people, we provide a different content. So there is this segmentation and specification of who needs what is provided, so that they are not lost in this entire thing.
Absolutely.
So that's, I think, in brief, I could say how we can respond to it.
We have another 12 minutes, so I want to have another round of questions. I want to come to you, Mr. Menon. So in a market scenario that is now, where everybody is trying to bring back the business, and ROI is the metric that drives, everybody tries to thrive on it. In that kind of a mindset, where do you make time for learning? Where do you pitch that, look, learning is very important? How do you bring it and convince the teams that, look, learning is also part of it?
Yeah, so absolutely, time is of critical essence. That's the reason why a lot of organizations, including ours, are able to actually provide learning on the go. Now, as Suman mentioned that there could be various app-based learning systems which can be directly downloaded onto your smartphones. The e-content getting populated there. You can learn right at the start of the day, end of the day, on a weekend, whenever there is time. So that is one aspect which currently is getting applied everywhere, including most of the organizations. The second is that the content is the king even now. I mean, the program has to have, it should be rich in its content, right? I mean, content is available over net, as you mentioned by Ruhail, but what you take out from there and how you curate a program is of a very, very critical essence again. So if the content is not good enough, you will not be able to hold the attention of the audience at all. Right. The other piece would be saying that, move from just an instruction to an experience kind of a domain, with so many applications coming in, with the fact like a Netflix or a Amazon Prime, also, their instructional designs is something that one needs to look at, because it's so easy to log in, easy to have a look at it, etc. So some of your e-learning programs has to also factor in that aspect. The other would be, because of this lockdown, some of the pieces like kinesthetic aspects of a training program actually has completely gone out of the window. At times, even that is required. So lot many times, although we say digital, this is digital medium for us, because of course there are interactions. I'm sitting on this side of the table, you're on the other side of the table, and the panel members are actually talking to us. So it is kind of something like a digital, but still it doesn't take care of the kinesthetic essence of a touch or an engagement in a room, etc. And that is something which people are missing, and everybody is trying to figure out, saying that, okay, how can we do something like that? Okay. Also the fact that gone are those days of we are only talking about content outline. I guess more often than not times today people talk about learning outcomes and objectives. It's just not an outline. And also the fact that one has to balance out between awareness and reinforcement.
Right.
And these are some of the aspects. If you build it as a part of your learning roadmap, your design, I guess the acceptance of the programs, the entire architecture of the programs becomes much more easier for us to cascade it down to people, with of course the technological innovations that has happened, that everything is available with a click of a button, on the move, on the go.
Right. Very, very well put. I want to go to Mr. Subramanian at this point. And sir, tell me, what are the key factors that you take into account while curating the right instructional design? So your audio is on mute, I guess.
Okay. I think that would be essentially maybe, given the question you asked, would be essentially building upon, I guess, some of the points Mr. Menon just covered, and Mr. Rudra as well. So I guess some of the factors would be, so yes, content, very important, obviously, because if content isn't there, then there's no relevancy. But I guess some of the sort of building on that, it is demonstrating that relevancy. So yes, it is relevant. We have judged that it is relevant, but then how do we actually demonstrate it to the particular stakeholder or the particular employee, and also how do we communicate it? So one of the things, I guess, which could help while you're curating your content there is bringing in an element of improvisation, where it's not a fixed standalone curation, but it is adapted to suit the needs of the particular employee, so they can pick and choose depending on the objectives, what it is that they're looking to accomplish, and then on that basis, so it's sort of it's a dynamic, flexible, curated content which really evolves to suit the particular need of the particular employee or the stakeholder. So as they're saying, a demonstration of that and the communication of that, very important. And how does it get across in terms which they can then link back to their own objectives? I think that's the other important part, which should ideally be reflected in that content which we are getting across when it's curated, as to say, okay, what are your objectives? And then some form of mapping of those objectives to the content. That's when they are going back to the point that was earlier made, as to that's when how do you get them to own the entire program of the content. So when they can clearly map that process and they can see this is how it links to my objectives, I think there will be a greater ownership. So I think, and then of course points which were covered earlier, while curating you always want it to be interesting, you don't want it to be where there's a level of engagement, interactivity, experiential, you want all of that there as well. So I think those are some of the things I would sort of touch upon when you're looking at making it interesting and relevant to the stakeholders.
Mr. Raghuvanshi, to you, two quick questions. One is that how do you make time for learning, convince employees in a ROI kind of a driven context? And second is, how do you then curate the right instructional design?
So I would say two things as I was listening to everyone, which I feel has always worked very well for us, is we always look at making especially key interventions aspirational in nature. Because if you see as an individual, when you have 20-30 things around you, you always want to prioritize which you want to pick and choose and which you think will make sense for you, right? So when you know that some intervention of your organization are critical to the success of the organization, you must make them aspirational for individuals. individuals. So simple ways of doing that is creating certifications. So people love to have certifications around their name that they've done something. So when you create levels and certifications, people aspire that, okay, let me clear one and then clear two and, gain these. The second thing that we also do is to, kind of bring the sponsorship around these programs, create action learning projects, which has also been something that makes people really look forward to the program, that they know that they'll have visibility and exposure to the leaders as part of these programs. So they look forward to those. The third aspect is really involving manager from the beginning of the program. And this has worked very, very well, because many times you put your individuals into a learning course, but the manager is completely away from everything that the individual is experiencing through the program, right? So how do you bring the manager on the same page along with the learner to ensure they both talk the same language and the manager experiences what his or her team member is going through and what's expected of them? I think these have worked wonders in terms of over and above the content in the entire designing of the intervention to ensure that people really take learning seriously and they make the most out of it.
Right. Mr. Rudra, how do organizations stay learning first than profit first? Is there a way to it? I mean, is it doable as well?
Yeah, so I think learning will remain first if learning is able to, I think, appropriately, or I think, and with the right data points, make the business and the leaders understand that how the learning is able to help in the growth of the business. I think the earlier concept of typically in learning, there was an earlier concept of man days. Okay. How many man days, how many training, how many programs, how many initiatives. It was how many. It was too much. It's largely about numbers. How many you want to do. But I think that entire thing has moved from how many to who, and basically from man days to man behind the days. Okay, or woman behind the days. So what I'm trying to drive at is that it's the person whom you are trying to develop matters more than all these numbers. Business leaders are not impressed today saying that we have done 100 programs, we have covered 100% of our employees. They said, okay, how does it help me? Okay, but if you tell them that in the last 1 year I have produced, I have been able to groom at 20 managers who can take up your next level of leadership, okay, or who can take your business manager role, or who can lead your project. Okay, that makes a sense to them. It may be a lesser number, okay, but the number it makes a sense for him, because he knows that tomorrow if he gets a new business, he's looking for a new guy in a new line of business or in the current, he knows where to look.
Right.
Okay, he doesn't have to. So I think that entire perspective of the man behind the days or the woman behind the days has to gain more and more I think prominence, and the HR job is going to be this only going forward.
Right.
In kind of highlighting that we are able to provide what you require.
Last 5 minutes, and I want to make this super fast, 20-second answers. Very quickly, I want to come to you, Mr. Subramanian, first. That what are two big shifts that you would see over the next 2 years as far as learning and developing that effective learning in organizations is concerned?
I think one is probably a move away. I wouldn't say entirely away, but move towards, as against your typical KPIs, etc., skills and knowledge, towards increasing competencies and behavior. I think there's already quite a lot of focus on that. So I think I see learning methodologies reflecting that. And the second is, I guess, we talk about this dynamic environment. So preparing people, not necessarily again in terms of skills, but changing their mindset, their aptitudes and attitudes towards coping with this dynamic environment and becoming transformational leaders. I think that's the sort of thing you might see increasingly reflected in learning programs.
Mr. Menon, quickly, your thoughts.
Okay, according to me, it should be authentic. It should build careers, create opportunities, because what is it there for me has to be answered. That's one. And as Professor said, that agility is critical. You don't even know that what is the environment going to be in a few years' time, and possibly you will not be able to plan it right today. But through the programs, if you kind of trigger a thought that whenever the dynamic change happens, that is a time when you as a professional is ready to take on those dynamics, and you will come out with solutions that would be required then, is a must. So building people in terms of their agility and making them ready to take on the dynamics, and how only a future will tell us, but in their mind people should be ready today, that assuming the fact that a lot of things are going to change in the future, and that's how the learning architecture should factor these aspects.
Perfect. Ms. Raghuvanshi, quickly.
Yes, I would say let's take the I out of ROI and replace it with application. And it's very important that as a leader, we drive in the organization that learning is important, so that even the cynical manager knows that blaming ROI is not going to work, and learning is an agenda that organization must drive.
Brilliantly put. And finally, Mr. Rudra, your final thought.
I said it earlier also. So I think it is the person behind the learning whom we should be concentrating on, and even if the progress in his career and life is incremental, but that incremental makes a lot of difference to that. So even incremental progress we should be looking at, but very specific to the person, how we can help him grow. So that should be the focus.
Ruhail, I'll just like to sum it up. One anecdotal line. A CFO tells an HR head that if I invest in training, and if the person actually quits and goes, what happens? So the HR or learning, so because it's a learning session, reverts back and says that in case if you don't train them and they stay back, then what happens? So that I would sum it up in terms of finding out what is the ROI.
Thank you to the only lady on the panel and gentlemen for this wonderful session. Been great. Some really key insights into what learning is like and how organizations can make the most of it. Thank you so much for taking time and joining us today.